Hello, everybody. Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm Ryan Wormeli, joined today by Derek Brown and by a man who needs no introduction. It's Andy Behrens of Yahoo. Andy, we're not quite into the late summer. Everybody's super busy and it's hard to find time, but I still appreciate you making the time to come on with us today.
That's an interesting way of telling me that it wasn't like I'm not doing you a huge favor. I'm doing you a mild favor because it's just June, but it's a pleasure to be here. I would of course say yes at any time.
And we greatly appreciate the mild favor that you are doing for us here. D-Bro, I haven't done a show with you in a couple weeks because I was traveling. How you been?
Been good, man. Yeah, I mean, you said it's not really crunch time. No, this is the part of the calendar where everybody in the fantasy industry goes on vacations
Yeah.
to kind of recharge in preparation for crunch time. So yeah, man. I mean, I know you were traveling around the continent and seeing everybody you could. Same. I mean, I was doing vacation and stuff, so it was a nice recharge. The yearly saltwater fishing trip with the family. So got a little bit of sun. Didn't get as much as I got last time because I think when I hopped back on shows last year, right after the vacation, I had like the full sunglass line and
Yeah.
like couldn't do a show without a hat on because I had like the half circle on my forehead. So, there's that. I didn't get exposed to as much sunburn as usual.
Well, D-Bro, I saw you were tweeting a bit about enjoying some crabs while you were
Oh, yeah,
traveling.
man.
I had a crab feast as well back east. It's basically my favorite meal. I'm rocking an Old Bay crab shirt for anybody watching on Yahoo.
Love it.
Andy, I know you're a Midwest guy. Are you a fan of crabs? I mean, it's probably not the same as it is on the coast.
Oh, sure. We actually have a couple times in the last couple of weeks. I've gone to shout out Half Shell, a little place on Diversey. Like we have some. I mean, it's Chicago. It's the best city in the world, so we have any kind of food that you want to get here. And yeah, I'm a huge fan. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's when I turned 30, my friends shipped some out here to Denver for me, some Maryland crabs, and growing up was just always my number one meal of the year, basically going to the beach. So I am a huge fan. I'm glad we're all in agreement on that. We'll find out if we're in agreement on some of these players we're going to be talking about today. We are talking 10 risky players in 2024 drafts, and we are going to have you guys determine if you are targeting these players or avoiding them based on their riskiness level. Now, obviously, like every player, like at the right price, you might become interested. So this is just kind of where they're going. Are you willing to jump in and take that risk, or are you looking for maybe a safer alternative? Just a quick note for everybody. All of our 2024 consensus rankings and tiers can be found at fantasypros.com/rankings. Let's jump right in, guys. We will start with the running backs. We will start with Saquon Barkley. He is RB6 in ECR, 14th overall is where he's going. Now, Andy, you are our guest, so I will start with you. Are you taking the risk on Saquon at RB6 and 14th overall?
This is of all the players on the list that we will be discussing today. This is the one where we're pretty deep into, like, we've all done some best ball drafts. We've probably all done some magazine mock drafts, things like that. That this is the one guy where I don't have him yet. It doesn't mean I don't feel like I'm proactively avoiding Saquon Barkley, but I do feel like there is always someone in a draft who thinks, well, someone who sees a plausible path for Saquon to finish as like the RB1, right? And they're taking him back half of round one, or they're taking him at or near the turn in round two. And that's not where I'm at. I think there are more headwinds in Philadelphia than we necessarily than maybe everybody's accounting for, right? I think it's the fact that Jalen Hurts is his quarterback and is just simply not going to feed him 90 targets. I think that's one thing. The fact that Jalen Hurts is his quarterback and is also the primary goal line rusher, or has been in recent years for Philadelphia, I think is another thing. It's not to say that Jalen's going to finish with, a dozen 1-yard touchdowns again or whatever it was last year, but he calls his own number at the goal line. The Eagles call his number at the goal line. He's great at it. So I don't see the path to Saquon necessarily leading the league and scrimmage yards. I don't necessarily see the path to Saquon finishing with 16, 18 touchdowns, that kind of total. I think he's fine. He's a really good player, deep into his career, got some miles on him now. And I just don't end up with him. I've also, like, I've ranked my way into a situation where I've got some guys who I think consensus has, buried in the third round or whatever, who I have ahead of Saquon. And that really affects who I get.
Yeah, it's funny, talking about Hurts as like the goal line option. I've seen a couple people say this, and I've said this too on shows during the offseason about how with Jason Kelsey retiring, maybe the tush push
Hmm.
isn't as effective. That also is going to impact Saquon running the ball. They're losing an elite center. That maybe that hurts the tush push. It also hurts, opening up lanes to a degree when you have a downgrade at such an important position for Saquon. I always like to ask people this, Andy, because I think it's a really informative question to kind of just see how analysts think about this. But when you have a running back who joins an offense that has a mobile quarterback, do you tend to more like the fact that it's going to maybe make him more efficient and open up running lanes because of the threat of Hurts running? Or is it more of a downgrade for you in the stuff you already mentioned, going to see fewer targets and, the goal line stuff as well? Do you see it more as a benefit or a downgrade when any running back joins any offense with a mobile quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, the silver lining, if you want to find one, is that there are presumably a lot more yards before contact available in the offense. Certainly to Saquon, given where he was last year and the circumstances in which he's been running for the last couple seasons, versus what he's going to face in the year ahead. Right, he's going to get a much cleaner path past the line of scrimmage than he's had, I think, in recent seasons. But again, the problem is like we start when you're evaluating strictly for fantasy purposes, we care an awful lot about like what is a reasonable projection for you as a receiver, and are you going to dominate the goal line? And it's not like I don't think he's going to, he's probably going to reach 10 rushing touchdowns. He'll reach 8 to 10 rushing touchdowns, something like that. But I just like DeAndre Swift was just there and he played a full season and he's one of the best receiving backs of this era and he caught 39 passes. So like, I don't, do I think that Saquon is all of a sudden going to be back in the conversation for like 65 catches, 75 catches? I very much doubt it.
Debra, what do you think about Saquon? Is he somebody that you're, targeting and willing to take the risk in this range, or are you looking elsewhere?
It's not that I dislike a lot of the same points that Andy made. Like, I don't dislike Saquon, but I do find myself going in other directions. Like, it's either I'm pressing the button on wide receivers this part of the draft, or I'm just willing to draft Jahmyr Gibbs. And people could say, well, you're going to say you don't want Saquon Barkley, but you think he's too risky, but you're willing to go with Jahmyr Gibbs, who's still going to be sharing a backfield with David Montgomery. And I'm like, yeah, I sure am. Because there's a lot of to like out of Jahmyr Gibbs. We know, I mean, there's been tons of awesome work that's done in the space. Shout out to Ryan Heath with Fantasy Points that's done a lot of the work talking about like second year backs and getting the bump in volume. But I want to go back to last season, weeks 10 through 18 for Gibbs. I don't look at him as being a very risky pick, and the upside is definitively there. Looking at what happened over that stretch after David Montgomery came back, like this was Gibbs' backfield.
Mhm.
And any way we want to stretch it, man, like Gibbs owns 65.4% of the snaps on passing downs, which won't really blow anybody's mind. But if you were to talk about the red zone usage, he outpaced David Montgomery in red zone rushing attempts. So I don't think people are understanding that 28 to 26, as well as he massively outsnapped David Montgomery inside of the 20. 63.4% of the snaps inside the red zone were Jahmyr Gibbs. So while even the touch totals inside the goal line, and we know he has the passing downs on lock, which I could still paint you an easy case that passing down ceiling could go up, considering out of 48 qualifying quarterbacks last year, Jared Goff was only 38th in check down rate. So that can go up this season, and we could see even more out of Jahmyr Gibbs. So if I'm in that range and I'm wanting to press the button on a running back, it's not Saquon Barkley, and it is Jahmyr Gibbs every single time.
Andy, it looks like you've got Gibbs ahead of Barkley as well in your rankings.
I do, yeah. And that's part of why I don't get Barkley. Like whether we're mocking, whether it's best ball, whatever. And to Derek's point, like Jared Goff is not taking those goal line carries, right? There was so much work inside the 5 and inside the 10 for running backs in Detroit last year. It doesn't even really matter if Gibbs isn't getting 100% of that work. There's so much of it. it's pretty unreasonable to think that Detroit won't again be an offense that averages 28, 30, 32 points per game, right? We're talking about one of the NFL's elite offenses, and none of that, none of that goal line, like the most valuable touches in the game for a running back. We don't have to worry about any of that going to Goff. We can reasonably expect Jared Goff to throw to the running backs a fair amount. I like everything about Gibbs's. The only thing that you could really say about Saquon is I suppose you could talk yourself into there being a path for him to be like a 380 touch player if everything goes right. But again, I don't know that I like the shape of those touches as much as I do for Gibbs.
All right, next running back on the list, Kyren Williams. Debra, I'll start with you this time. He is RB8, 19th overall is where he is ranked currently. Are you taking the risk on Kyren?
I am taking the risk on Kyren, and that might surprise people considering, the foot injury stuff they were worried about in the offseason, the size of the player and stuff. Here, the fact of it is that is there some risk to absolve here? Sure. But that's also why we're looking at Kyren Williams at RB8 and he's not a top 5 running back. I think some of that risk is baked in and still the price, okay, still a top 24 player. But again, I'm willing to take that risk because in this Rams offense, if he can stay healthy, we know what we're getting. We're getting probably a top 5 back. Blake Corum is still there, but I don't think that he's going to be the lead back, much less even play 30, 35% of the snaps. He's probably the guy that's going to salt away the clock if the Rams, the defense, bounces back and plays well this year. He's the guy in the positive game script. But if games are close or they're trailing, I think this is still all Kyren Williams' backfield. And looking at what he did before the injury is something I specifically want to highlight. I could talk about days about okay, his touch counts, the snap counts, and all that kind of stuff. But the efficiency we saw out of Kyren Williams at the beginning of the season, so weeks 1 through 6, before he got hurt, that's something I specifically want to highlight here because he had a 28% missed tackles forced per attempt rate. His yards after contact per attempt was 3.0. And to add another layer of context for people, if he would have kept up that level of breaking tackles over an entire season, it would have ranked him 4th in missed tackles forced, tied with Bijan Robinson, and 9th ahead of Jonathan Taylor in yards after contact per attempt. So if we do get the health, we know the role is amazing, and some of that risk is baked into his ADP.
Andy, I'm curious what you think about Kyren because I find him to be one of the most fascinating players to talk about as we enter draft season. There was basically nobody that was more fun to roster besides maybe Christian McCaffrey when he was healthy, but he wasn't always healthy. They did draft a running back on day 2. I mean, how are you evaluating him right now?
So I think to a point that has already been made, one of the things that they liked most about Blake Corum what was his similarity to Kyren Williams, right? Right. So that speaks well for Kyren's role and the job security that he has. I actually think that, just based on reading tea leaves and everything that Sean McVay has said about the foot issue with Williams, I don't think anybody should be worried about it. Whatever, it's an injury. You want to worry about it, you're free to worry about it. But they had him doing work on the side, and the other thing about the Rams, and this is actually something that I sort of vowed to carry from last season into this season. They're very honest with us. If all you did last summer in terms of draft prep was just listen to what people associated with the Rams and their beat writers were saying, you had a great year. Because they were screaming at us that Puka Nacua was better than advertised, and their social team was just flooding the internet with Puka Nacua clips. They told us very early on and very consistently that, hey, Matt Stafford looks like old Matt Stafford. He's slinging the ball, which turned out to be 100% true. And then sort of late in camp, a lot of Kyren Williams buzz too. And maybe this is his job more than it's Cam Akers' job. And they were straight up with us. But on the other hand, they love Blake Corum, and they're talking up Blake Corum right now in almost exactly the same way that they were hyping Puka Nacua last year. And I do think he's going to be a real factor. But to a point that's already been made, it is a little bit baked into Kyren Williams' draft price, right? Like if we're not, I mean, had there been no Blake Corum, or if they drafted like some, day 3 running back that, you could build a case for, but was more a contingent value guy than any sort of threat, anything like that, we would be taking Kyren Williams in the first round. Like he would be, I don't know exactly where he would fall overall for me, but it would probably be like overall 9 or 10, something like that. Absolutely dominant. Like you talked about what he did before the injury. After the injury, when we needed him most in fantasy, he was like 120 scrimmage yards per game, and he scored every week. So he was great. He absolutely carried you through the fantasy postseason. So I think this is a great player. I think he's probably appropriately priced. I've landed him. I will tell you though that I did give you an alternative target when we were prepping this thing, and my alternative target here is Isiah Pacheco. I think I'm on Pacheco Island, which is a little bit weird, but I view him as I think he's a plausible round 1 player. I never have to take him there. I have absolutely no questions whatsoever about what his role is going to be. I thought he was one of the biggest offseason winners, right? Because Kansas City did all these things to upgrade the quality of their offense without touching the backfield around Pacheco. Like that is 100% Pacheco's job as long as he stays healthy. He demonstrated last year that he's an excellent receiving threat. Like that's in his bag. He can do that. I think he's a sneaky candidate to finish as the RB1 overall. He seriously just needs to stay healthy. He's tied to the best quarterback in the game. He's tied to potentially the best offense in the game. I think it's an ideal situation. And the fact that we haven't seen him deliver like a 1,600 or 1,700 yard season yet, that doesn't mean it can't happen. He's certainly teed up for it. So that's one example of a guy that I just happen to like a little bit better than Kyren Williams right now. But I've got nothing bad to say about Kyren.
You are on Pacheco Island. I would actually pull this up even before you brought that up. On Fantasy Pros, you can go to an individual player and click rankings, and you can see where everybody has them and who is highest on a player. And correct me if this is not up to date, but in half PPR amongst running backs, he's RB4 for you is how we have it listed. Nobody else has him higher than RB6. So you are 2 full spots ahead of anybody else at the position in terms of how you're ranking Pacheco. So you are...
I will also tell you that like I go through a process of, just projecting each player in as, non-emotional a way as I can do it. And he's actually a little higher than that in projections. And I was like, no, that's going to seem insane. I gotta lower him a little bit. I don't see any impediments here. I don't see what's stopping us from making him a first round pick. I thought everybody loved him too. Like I thought he was everybody's sleeper when he came into the league, and now we're kind of off him.
I was looking also at just like on the Yahoo page rankings, and this is overall, not at running back. And it was, all your coworkers and colleagues have it 29th overall, 27th, 39th, and you've got him 10th overall on the site. So definitely up there. Debro, what do you make of Pacheco this year quickly?
I mean, I like him. I think that he's right on that cusp of being an RB1. I'm not going to push back hard about Pacheco because the thing that he gets access to this year, no Jerick McKinnon, like CEH is not coming for that workhorse role. We know Pacheco, and we saw this last year. I mean, he's going to play 70% of the snaps, maybe even freaking higher. I think the only thing that pushes me a little bit back from where Andy is I just wonder, with Patrick Mahomes and now all the receiving weapons, like what is the touchdown equity for Pacheco? And that's the biggest thing where it's like we look at all these different offensive situations and it's like, where do the touchdowns go? What does that look like? Like, would I be absolutely surprised if Pacheco ended up with like a James Conner type of season? Like in the sense of he spikes 12 to 15 touchdowns? No. Is it hard for me to kind of get there? Like, do I think he probably ends up in the 7 to 10 range? Possibly. And that's kind of where I wonder if the difference is. Like, how many touchdowns do you think he spikes this year, Andy?
Yeah, I think 7 to 10 touchdowns requires an injury that causes him to miss like 3 weeks.
Okay.
I think if he gives us 16 or 17 games, and you never assume that for any running back. But I do think if he gives us 16 or 17 games, it's going to be hard, given what I would expect for Kansas City's offense generally, for him to avoid 14, 15, 16 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's probably where he finishes, even though, like, huge caveat, the Chiefs will do some, I don't need to, it's not breaking any news to say that the Chiefs will do the wildest stuff when they get inside the 5,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they will scheme the weirdest things for McCole Hardman for like the third tight end, for the rugby player that they saw. So like, if you want to fret about those things, I totally get it. But you know, I I don't see anybody. I don't see anyone in his way, and I don't see anyone who's even an inconvenience to him in this offense right now.
So to Andy's point, I guess right now, like I'm looking at the odds on betting pros. I should be slamming the over 7.5 rushing touchdowns at plus money. I need to put that bet in now.
Yeah.
Some of us may have taken that already.
They have already done it.
Love it.
All right, let's go to another running back here. DeVon Achane, maybe the ultimate like boomer bust guy in terms of what we see week to week, in terms of what he could be this season. You know, maybe some theoretical questions about health and role and whatever, but the speed and the fit in the offense is absolutely sublime. Andy, I'll start with you here. He's RB11 and 35th overall. Are you taking the risk on Achane there?
Yeah, I mean, I love him, and I've landed him a few times. So this is certainly not a player that I avoid. This, I will say, this is another case where I just happen to have some guys ranked. I'm an outlier in the industry on probably a couple different running backs, so I do have some dudes that are ahead of him. It's really hard not to love the player, right? Like 800 rushing yards or whatever it was on like 100 carries is stupid. And then like 20% plus of his carries went for 10 or more yards. I mean, it was just one of the most ridiculously efficient seasons that we've seen in the fantasy era in NFL history, right? Whether that's actually sustainable, well, I mean, I think we know the answer to that question, right? Like nobody comes in at 8 yards per carry or 7.8 or whatever it was last year. Like that's probably not going to be where this guy settles in. But it you know, in fairness to the Dolphins and every great thing that they did last year, they, you know, that offense finds big plays for a whole bunch of guys. So it's not going to surprise me if we see more workload out of him. You know, I think everybody knows the offseason story on Achane, added muscle, right? Like and of course this was going to be an issue for a guy whose like primary attribute was speed in the past, and who in every season prior to this one basically was like preparing himself for a track season when the NFL season ended, right? Which involves like, you know, you can't get up to like 225, 230 and be, you know, and run 10-1 or 10 flat. So like it's awesome that he's actually like adding mass. I think that's pretty necessary. He didn't seem like somebody who was ever really going to be able to hold up to a full NFL workload at the size that he entered the league. And maybe that's still a problem, but I think it speaks well to his role and what they expect for him moving forward, that he's like, you know, he seems to have successfully put on a little bit of mass. I think he's great. There are guys that I take ahead of him, but I have landed him in a handful of leagues, and he's just one of those huge range of outcomes guys, right? Because Mostert isn't going to go away unless Raheem Mostert, who is now very old by the standards of the position, and has been injury prone in the past, you know, I mean, that could definitely happen again. And then all of a sudden we're looking at Achane with as much work as he could possibly handle. If that happens, you know, he has a chance to finish as a top 5 running back.
D-Bro, are you taking the swing on Achane here?
Oh yeah, definitely taking the swing. I mean, and just to Andy's points, like, does he reproduce the outlier efficiency season that he had in his rookie year? Probably not, but we do see a lot of outlier guys, and it's just like, because I remember after Alvin Kamara's rookie season, everybody's like, okay, he can't produce like that yards per carry mark again. And I'm not saying that DeVon Achane reproduces that, but could he get the goal line role in this offense, where we just saw Raheem Mostert spike over 20 touchdowns? He was 5th in red zone touches. That could go to Achane this year. And if that does happen, even in a split backfield, like, I'm not telling you that DeVon Achane is going to turn into like a 20, 23 touch per game kind of guy, but 12, 15, maybe 16 touches and split some of that to the passing game. And if he gets the goal line work for a player that was RB5 in fantasy points per game, again, the risk of some of these metrics sliding back and the ambiguity of this backfield is baked into his price. Even though it's still hefty, it's still baked in because what we saw last year and how he produced. So yes, like, for a player, and I feel like we're at the exact same spot we were last year. Like, we walked into last season, we're like, I know the Dolphins are going to put up points. Don't know who I need to be drafting out of this backfield. And here we are staring at the same thing again this year. I'm not making the same mistake of last year. I'm just going to draft a ton of Dolphins backs. Like, I want exposure to all these guys,
Yeah.
whether it's Achane early, Mostert somewhere in the middle rounds, or drafting all the Jalen Wright late. I want to take shots on all these guys.
Where are you drafting Achane, D-Bro? Is he somebody that you're taking like early third round? Is he somebody that you're seeing if you can let slide later? Is he somebody you're reaching the back end of the second round because the upside is so ridiculous? Where are you actually clicking draft on him?
I've got Achane, and I'm ahead of consensus. So right now, RB11, 35th overall. I've got him at, DeVon Achane, where are you at? I've got him at 25th overall. So I'm willing to take him in the second round of drafts, early third, depending on, league size and things like that. I definitely want to be ahead of ADP, though.
Andy, where are you drafting Achane in the leagues where you're getting him?
Where I've had a couple of mocks in which I've got him like round 4, middle of round 4. They're among the players. I guess I'll just Pacheco obviously is somebody that I have ahead of him if I've got him at RB4. I am always surprised when he goes ahead, and this is like consensus at NFC right now. This is consensus a lot of places, but Achane goes pretty consistently in a lot of spots ahead of Derrick Henry, which is wild to me. And maybe we're just over Derrick Henry because it's been a long career, it's been a great career, and that you're throwing him in the Zeke Elliott bin or something like that. But like that guy could score 20 touchdowns this year. That guy could lead the league in touchdowns this year, and it's like that's the plan for him, and whatever, you play in a full PPR league, you ding him a little bit, touchdowns still matter in full PPR, right? Like that's still, I mean, I just that guy has like a standard scoring upside unlike almost anyone's other than McCaffrey and Bijan, I think. So Henry is one of those guys where like if it's Achane or Henry, I don't even like, that's not even a choice to me. I always take Derrick Henry, but that is not where the industry is. That is not where high stakes drafters have been. That's not where a lot of people are. So that's the reason that I don't get more of Achane is really, Pacheco and Henry are the problem. My own opinion of Pacheco and Henry.
I'm with you on that, Andy. I've got Derrick Henry ranked one spot ahead of DeVon Achane. I'm with you. I just don't understand, like, have we not learned after so many years that betting against Derrick Henry is a bad bet to make? I mean, I'm just not doing it anymore. Like, previous years, I talked myself into it, and I'm like, yeah, he's getting older. I'm not this year. I'm all in on Derrick Henry. I'm over it.
I was going to say, it's almost a shame that it's me and Debra on the show because we're just going to be in complete unison with you on Derrick Henry, Andy, because I think this is maybe the fourth show where I'm going to bring up that his rushing touchdown total is 10.5. And if he's healthy, there's no chance.
He's still at plus money too. Still at plus money.
I mean, it's just zero, like, again, it's purely a bet on health. If he is healthy, you tell me he's going to score fewer touchdowns than Gus Edwards did last year in this offense. Like the lessons they learned from not running the ball against Kansas City in the AFC Championship game. Like I don't see any world where he's not a top 12 running back, like easily, assuming he's healthy, given this offense and everything. So you will get no pushback on Henry from us. I was really glad you brought him up because it's an excuse for us to just like praise him again, which we do seemingly on a monthly basis.
You also mentioned the benefit of playing, obviously he's playing with the greatest rushing quarterback, in my opinion, that we've ever seen. And Lamar's a guy, and so there's spacing issues that are a clear benefit there. And Lamar's a guy who's not taking goal line carries, right? Like Lamar isn't trying to score. They're not trying to get Lamar a dozen rushing touchdowns. He'll score from distance occasionally, but they're not calling his number again and again and again at the 1 yard line. Like that's going to be all Derrick Henry. Literally all he has to do is play 14 or 15 games. He can score 20 times.
It's a great point. I've made it a lot about how they don't want to run him up close. And Lamar's lost weight this offseason. It's been a talking point. That's even more kind of an excuse to not rush him in close and take all those unnecessary hits. And then, of course, you add a guy like Henry who can take that beating for him. I could not be more excited about getting Henry where he's going in drafts right now. I think he's an absolute no-brainer. Let's go to another running back here. Josh Jacobs, RB13, 39th overall in the rankings. Debro, are you taking the risk on Jacobs right now?
I have been very loud about this all off season. I'm not going to shut up now. I'm avoiding Josh Jacobs like the plague. I want nothing to do with him. I'm not drafting him. Give me all the Marshawn Lloyd in drafts. Jacobs last year, we saw, basically that high volume season he got ruined him. And I don't know if we ever see Josh Jacobs, his tackle breaking metrics bounce back. So at that price point, I'm avoiding Jacobs, and I'm drafting all the Joe Mixon this year. Like I have him ranked aggressively. Like I have him as a top 10 running back. He's going to get all the volume. We think Houston and the scoring potential inside of that offense, as well as, and it gets buried, but the continuity of that offensive line for an offensive line. And this also waters down to Joe Mixon that, I mean, they're returning everybody, and assuming they actually have health for the entire season. Last year, what we saw out of this offensive line when they were healthy, weeks 9 through 18, they were a top 12 run blocking offensive line. Like they were 12th in adjusted yards before contact per attempt. So Mixon is getting an upgrade with the offensive line. We know he's going to play all the freaking snaps over that same stretch. Cincinnati was 16th in the same metric. And I think that the rushing game scheme for Mixon is also going to be a boost for a player that, yes, we could poke some holes in his efficiency profile, but he was still worlds better than Josh Jacobs in tackle breaking last year. And missed tackles forced per attempt, he ranked 23rd. Jacobs, amongst 49 qualifying running backs, was 37th. And now you talk about the system going to Houston. The zone rushing rate compared from Cincinnati to Houston was massively different. We're talking about 39.2% versus 45.9%. And with Mixon this year, that could go up. Mixon was 10th in zone success rate last year. So all arrows point to me drafting a ton of Joe Mixon and no Josh Jacobs.
Andy, what do you think about both Jacobs and also Mixon as a potential alternative?
First of all, comparing Josh Jacobs to the plague. I mean, the plague killed like 40 or 50 million people. Okay. Josh Jacobs ain't gonna do that.
That could be about the number of fantasy teams that could all fall victim to him, though.
I was gonna say, it sounded, the way you said the plague, Andy, was like that Seinfeld episode where the parents made like, but do you know they still have the plague? I mean, my God, the plague.
So let's let's not, the Josh Jacobs to fatal pandemic. Let's not go there necessarily. Here's my thing with Josh Jacobs. I think he's one of the best backs of the past 5 years, and he's been one of my favorite players to watch since he came into the league. So this like largely comes down to, do you think that last year's version of Josh Jacobs, and obviously there was the protracted holdout and there was an injury, and there were all sorts of reasons for him not to be at his best. Do you think that's representative of what we get moving forward? Or are we getting the guy who was never not at the top of the league in terms of missed tackles and missed tackle rate? Jacobs never really got the credit from the fantasy community for being just about the most elusive back in the game from the moment he came into the league, because he's not a home run guy. He doesn't have the top end speed. He can make anybody miss in a phone booth, or a phone book. Heck, he's just a phenomenal runner to watch. And like, if you're just like a pure film guy, he has to be one of your favorite players. But he's also not, he's not going to run away from defensive backs either. So he doesn't have that aspect to his game. I think it's a great landing spot. I don't think that he's going to be used, in the best version that we've seen of Josh Jacobs, obviously, is the guy who never came off the field and led the league in rushing. And I don't think he's headed for that in Green Bay. I do think that they want somebody else to be 35% of the snaps, something like that. But I do think he's a great player. So I end up with him. I've had this conversation with my friend Chris Harris a lot, and he and I are both like, we're huge Josh Jacobs guys. But there is a world in which last year's version of Josh Jacobs is as good as it ever gets again. And if that's where we are, I totally understand anyone avoiding him.
Now, Andy, everybody's pausing the show right now. Everybody under the age of 35 is going to Google what a phone book is right now. So
that's fair. That's fair too.
They're probably Googling what a phone book is.
I'd say I mentioned this. I'm old enough to know what that is. So
they're probably also Googling what Seinfeld is. The way
That's fair. That's
Long
fair.
too, so.
Google's getting a lot of action in this show.
Yeah, for sure. We are just over a month away from training camp, so it's time to start looking ahead to the NFL season with DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Get a jump start on the season with futures bets on division winners, win totals, stat leaders, and so much more. Explore the latest odds and check out futures for your favorite teams and players on the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Some futures I'm looking at right now are division winner odds. The three biggest favorites on DraftKings are the Chiefs at minus 230, the 49ers at minus 195, and the Falcons at minus 115. There are a lot of intriguing teams getting plus money to win their divisions this year. I like the Colts at plus 310. The Bears at plus 265 are interesting, although I might like the Packers better in that division at plus 210. The Ravens at plus 130. Of course, I can't not mention the Ravens, but I will say also the Steelers even at plus 850. Those all look interesting to me right now. However you plan to bet your NFL futures, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code FantasyPros. New customers bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets instantly. That's code FantasyPros only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Sorry, Andy, I do kind of like the Packers better than the Bears at those odds.
I did take that as a personal attack.
I know. I had to kind of look down. I looked down to see Andy's face when you were rattling through that. I was like, "Oh no, we're about to end the show."
I got to be honest to the listeners, but I like both. I think both are interesting potential bets there. It's a really fun division. We have one more running back here that I want to talk about. And we've gone a little longer on the running backs just because they're kind of inherently riskier players, just given injury history and stuff like that. So we'll go a little faster on the back half of the show. But the last running back here, Austin Ekler, he's much further down in the rankings than the other ones. RB33, 103rd overall. A lot of name value coming into him, kind of even being included here. And you guys both kind of gave alternative targets and said that, he's somebody that you're probably not taking the risk on. And Andy, I wrote down for yours based on what you said. Your alternative target is pretty much everybody who's going in that range. But you did give a specific name as well.
Yeah, there's just this huge group of super interesting guys, and Debro's going to talk about one of them. Like I don't know, I could have talked about Chase Brown. I could have talked about any number of players here. The guy I picked was new teammate Brian Robinson, who's obviously much younger. Was really good last year. And
thank you.
Injuries were an issue. Injuries are probably always going to be an issue for most running backs. It's part of the profile. But he added a pass catching dimension that was basically the equal of anything we got from Ekler last year. I don't see any reason why Brian Robinson won't be 50% of the backfield touches, if not more. He's younger. Eckler's another guy who what a wonderful guy, right? Like he's been great to the fantasy community. He's been a great fantasy citizen, all that, but he's on the older side right now. And he's another guy who, a more extreme example of the Josh Jacobs scenario where he's got to be better moving forward than he was last year. And to his credit, he played through some stuff last year and it clearly compromised him. But if he's not going to get all the way back to old Austin Eckler, I'm not super interested. I also don't see a huge receiving workload for either of these two backs. One, because they have to compete with each other, and two, because they have a proactive runner at quarterback now.
Debro, I know you are a Brian Robinson guy as well.
Yeah, I love the fact that Andy brought him up here. I just keep drafting Brian Robinson. If I'm in that backfield, I don't draft Austin Eckler.
Yeah.
You talk about the mobility of the quarterback. The checkdowns are not going to be there. But the other thing that Andy brought up, we're also not giving Brian Robinson enough credit for how freaking good he was last year. I don't think many people would be able to tell you amongst all running backs last year with at least 25 targets, Brian Robinson ranked 4th in yards per route run. I just don't think that it's a slam dunk. Eckler's taking all of the passing down work. I just don't see that happen. I think he's going to be a change of pace guy, but even in this range, if I'm going to go to split backfield, I'm just going to take the younger version of Austin Eckler right now. I'm going to take Tajae Spears. I mean, RB35, we can talk about, split backfields and things like that. Spears still has the juice where Austin Eckler, we're kind of questioning it. Can he get back to being who he was previously? And are all those touches, have they kind of rolled up and we're never going to see that player again? Spears is firmly still in the prime of his career. They brought in Tony Pollard to take some of the heavy lifting on early downs. And what did we see out of Tajae Spears last year? He was efficient. He was efficient as crazy. anytime he got the ball, man, it was just insane. We're talking about a player that was 5th in explosive run rate and 14th in yards after contact per attempt. So, like, again, if Tony Pollard doesn't get back to pre-injury Tony Pollard, Tajae Spears might actually lead this backfield in touches, and I don't see a realm where that happens for Austin Eckler.
Let's go to the one wide receiver that we have on this list, and it's Stefon Diggs. He's wide receiver 24, 45th overall in the rankings. Andy, are you taking the risk on Diggs now in Houston or looking elsewhere?
Yeah, I can't say that I have to any significant extent just yet. I think I do have like a single share of Steph Diggs because he fell unusually far in like a magazine mock draft, and I was like, look, this is crazy. We got to keep this mock real. And I took him, but it wasn't like it was like integrity of the mock reasons. It wasn't even like, boy, do I want me some Steph Diggs. I think there is a really legitimate question as to whether what we saw in the back half of last season is representative of, what Diggs is going to be moving forward. And it wasn't like, obviously the offense changed, new coordinator, and some of the targets go away, but like the target share stayed basically the same. They were working him pretty hard, and if he hauls in that ball in the playoff game against the Chiefs, he's probably still there, right? Like what is even the point of Steph Diggs if you're not making that catch for us? And he was just poor in contested situations over the back half of the season. He's been an incredible player, and he's probably going to get peppered with targets, but it's not going to be 160 targets anymore. Like Nico Collins is a real thing and Tank Dell is a real thing. And I can imagine a scenario where none of those guys sees more than 130 targets and Diggs doesn't lead the team in opportunities. And, he finishes with like 105 targets in a nice enough season, but it just isn't a splash year for fantasy.
One of the things I always try and think about when I go into draft season is, what questions do I see about the season where if we get the answer right, you're going to put yourself in a really good position to benefit and win your league? And to me, one of the questions this year is what to do with the receivers in Houston and being able to correctly identify which guy is going to be the alpha, if there is one in the offense, which guy is going to be the best value on draft day. Getting that situation right, I think, is going to be a major key to having a successful fantasy season. And something you can really benefit from if you get it right. And I really struggle with what to do with them because, I mean, Diggs is there for a year. He's going to loudly demand targets. He wants to kind of show himself and show the league that he can still play at a really high level for the upcoming contract. But also Nico Collins was awesome last year, and Tank Dell was arguably even better before he got injured. So, I mean, my main takeaway from all this is that I probably just want to draft a lot of CJ Stroud. As much as I want to draft any quarterback who doesn't run, Stroud is like at the top of that list because I just think there's so many fun options here. But Andy, when you look at Diggs, where he's going versus Tank Dell, where he's going versus Nico Collins, where he's going, do you see a right answer there?
I think the world of Tank Dell. So I've taken a little bit of Tank Dell, and I also think that like some of the highlight plays that we saw from Nico Collins last year, like those are still going to be there. Like the connection between Nico and CJ Stroud is very real and isn't going away. And Diggs sort of caps anybody's. He's a problem in terms of anybody's ability to reach like 150 targets, anything like that. But Collins is the guy that I have ahead of the other two, and I'm just sort of enamored of Tank Dell. So I do get a fair amount of Tank Dell.
Debra, what are you doing with Diggs?
Not drafting him at all. I'm drafting all the Collins and I'm drafting all Tank Dell. I think that both these guys proved last year that they're really stinking good at football. I don't see that changing. Yeah. And the thing about Nico Collins, and I wonder, like, is he the true answer for all of this? Because what we saw to Nico Collins when there was no Tank Dell, the offense collapsed around him and he was just putting up alpha level numbers, like these monster target shares, monster stat lines. And it's like, could he grow and that be a thing moving forward where he just establishes himself? He is the true number one in that offense. So I'm willing to draft Nico Collins at cost, even above that, like where he goes in underdog drafts in the 20s. Now he's gotten up to around 19th overall. I'm firmly willing to take that. But in this range, I'm avoiding Stefon Diggs. And the guy that I do want to highlight here, because in best ball drafts and in my rankings, I'm a little bit ahead of ECR here. I just keep drafting Christian Kirk. And we talk about what we project for passing attacks. And when I get into the realm of like these guys that are, and there's a long tier of like middling wide receiver 2s to wide receiver 3 range, I keep playing the game of, okay, what is the target upside if everybody stays healthy in these respective offenses? Who could just establish themselves as a true number one? What does the target ceiling look like? And for Jacksonville, I think they go immensely pass heavy. What we saw over the back half of their season, they've done nothing but add passing game weapons to support Trevor Lawrence all offseason. And I think they go pace up. And what we saw to Christian Kirk, if he could have stayed healthy, he was the clear wide receiver 1 in that offense. If you go back, Evan Ingram did not fully break out and put up these monster stat lines until Christian Kirk was hurt. Weeks 2 through 12 last year, this man was commanding a 22.6% target share. He was the wide receiver 19 in fantasy points per game. And his full season pace, and I don't usually like to do this, but I want to give people context about if he would have stayed healthy, what pace was he on? He was on pace for 138 targets, 94 receptions, and almost 1,300 receiving yards. I don't think Stefon Diggs gets anywhere close to sniffing any of those type of statistics in 2024. So this is easy Kirk and other options at that cost.
Andy, you did also provide an alternative target here to Diggs, and I wanted to bring him up because it's Zay Flowers, and that's somebody that D-Bro has been tweeting about a lot lately. So I wanted to kind of hear him win as well. But Andy, what do you like about Flowers?
Yeah, I get plenty of Flowers because first of all, if all he does in his second season is if they just use him the way they did in his first, it's fine. Because you're gonna end up with like 75 to 85 catches. You're gonna get 900 plus yards. He's gonna be really good. He's incredible after the catch. But there's a lot of near the line of scrimmage stuff last year, right? Like relatively low ADOT, like in the 8.5, 9 range. If they take some shots to Zay Flowers, which is the thing that we saw from Flowers in college, right? Like we know he can do it. We know he's super slippery. We know he's got speed. Like he profiles as somebody who could be like just a key factor as a deep threat. If they do more of that this year, he's got not wide receiver 1 overall potential necessarily, but like top 12 at the position. I would say that is within his range of outcomes. I mean, there's a chance here for him to take a massive leap, have kind of an outlier touchdown season. Like he's somebody who just all of the athletic traits that he has sort of scream that this should be a big play specialist. And if he's getting greater volume this year, and if the targets look a little bit different than they did last season, man, he's so close to unlocking a huge year.
I can't agree any more emphatically with Andy, everything he said. And the other thing I want to highlight here, if you look at how Baltimore gets defended, they faced the highest single high coverage rate in the NFL last year, 61.2%. Zay Flowers, and I know the first thing that people want to bring up with Zay Flowers, it's always, well, what is he going to do with Mark Andrews back? Last year with Mark Andrews, Zay Flowers versus single high coverage, 25.5% target share, 2.0 yards per route run. We talk about investing in talented second-year wide receivers. Why the hell do we not want to do that for a guy in a consolidated passing attack that is going to eat versus the coverage that Baltimore sees the most often, probably again in 2024?
It's a good note on the consolidated attack too, because like they lost Odell, who was whatever he was last year. They didn't really replace him. I mean, they gave an extension to Rashad Bateman, so obviously there's some trust level there and belief that he's going to maybe take the step forward. He hasn't yet, but they didn't go out and sign this big name receiver. They didn't draft a guy in the first couple rounds. It took Tez Walker in the 4th, but he's a guy that probably needs some development time anyway. So there's even with the tight ends being as good as they are, particularly Mark Andrews, there's a plenty of path to enough volume that we want to see out of a guy with Flowers' talent. Let's go to the quarterbacks, and I'm just going to group these guys together. Kyler Murray, he's QB9, 64th overall. Then Tua Tagovailoa, QB12, 90th overall. D-Bro, of those two quarterbacks, is there one that maybe you're more interested in taking the risk on and one that you're maybe looking elsewhere?
Yeah, I'm not drafting a lot of Tua at his cost. I'm just taking all the Jayden Daniels. I've talked about Jayden Daniels a ton on previous shows. I don't understand why he's being ranked where he's being ranked for a rushing quarterback. It's just free money. But Kyler Murray, I'm going to keep drafting him, man. Like right now, he's being drafted, or his ADP is QB9. I mean, that's his floor. That's what he showed us last year. He was QB9 in fantasy points per game. Like, do we not think the rushing goes up a little bit another year, like recovered from the ACL, as well as he was legitimately last year a terrible passer. And that's not something we've seen out of Kyler Murray. I mean, amongst 45 qualifying quarterbacks, 38th in CPOE, 35th in highly accurate target rate. He had the 9th highest off target rate. If those numbers bounce back for Kyler Murray, and we've seen him be a top shelf level passer in previous years, Kyler Murray, we're drafting in his floor. So give me all the Kyler, and yeah, I'm drafting Jayden Daniels easily over Tua.
Well, and Andy, when it comes to Kyler, Debro didn't even mention him. I assume as a fellow Big Ten fan, you are thrilled to see Marvin Harrison Jr. no longer in the conference and now playing in the NFL. And obviously just what a huge upgrade as wide receiver 1 for Kyler.
Yeah, I think with respect to Kyler, he's most of the reason that I'm just never in on the top quarterbacks, right? Because you got two possible plays out there. You have both Anthony Richardson and Kyler Murray, who are not going in the vicinity of Allen and Mahomes and Hurts, and obviously those guys are being great, assuming good health and all that. But like Murray goes so much later. And he's already been the QB3 in fantasy, right? Like we don't have to imagine a scenario where Kyler Murray breaks out. He broke out years ago. Like we know what it looks like when everything goes well, when he's fully healthy and the rushing stats are there. And now we've got maybe the best receiving core that he's had as a pro, right? Between McBride, and they're like they all complement each other too, is the thing. Marvin Harrison Jr. is great, like a flawless receiving prospect. McBride is great. The supporting receivers are great, and they sort of complement what everybody else does really well. You just say the names and understand the roles. This is as good a setup as Murray has had. And again, he's already been the QB3. So I don't have to, there's no wish casting here. Like I know what it looks like when it goes really well. And the setup is as good as it's ever been. So Murray for me is an easy guy where like I can wait deep in a draft and I can still end up with a quarterback where I can tell myself a story about how they finish number 1 overall at the position. Now, two is a different story because like, and you kind of alluded to this with Stroud. If we're drafting somebody who has like 0 rushing upside, you have to be able to tell yourself a story about how they're going to get to like 5,200 passing yards and like 45 touchdowns, right? And I don't know. He's throwing a Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, and so maybe that's in play. But I know they want to run the ball a ton. I know that we've already talked about Achane. Even in a season in which Tua led the NFL in passing yards, it wasn't a special fantasy season. So I agree on Jayden Daniels. I just want to throw out the name Trevor Lawrence as somebody who is definitely not going to have a season as poor as what he had last year. And I like some of these like video packages are already circulating on X. So you've probably seen like all the highlights of the near misses that Trevor Lawrence had last year. We do on the Yahoo Fantasy Football podcast, we do a segment that we were doing a weekly segment last year called the Panic Meter. And so like we talked about Trevor Lawrence every week because people drafted him as a plausible like top 5 quarterback and they were panicking constantly. And so every week I felt like it was my job to recount the number of like 1 foot inbounds touchdowns that were caught off passes from Trevor Lawrence, and the number of like double catches where guys were just barely out of the end zone, and the crushing drops that happened like at or near the end zone last year. Like it was just, in my mind, it was like a really snake bit first half of the season. Not that he was secretly great. He threw too many interceptions. I'm not trying to say that, this is still the best quarter, whatever you thought of him as a generational prospect, whatever. I'm not giving you that. I'm not saying that it was a secretly great season, but that could have been a whole lot better statistically in the first half. And then he was injured in the second half. And the other thing that you get with Lawrence is he's a great rushing quarterback. They'll never allow like that offense to put him at risk as much as like if they wanted to use him, in my opinion, the way that like the Bills run Josh Allen, he could do all those things. He was a great running quarterback in college. He has 9 rushing touchdowns over the last couple of years. He can make you miss in tight spaces. So I have some rushing upside with Trevor Lawrence, and I know I have passing upside. We already talked about Christian Kirk. Brian Thomas, such a perfect fit for that player, such a perfect fit for Trevor's game. He's always been a great deep passer. I like him in a big way for a huge bounce back.
To
I really
Andy's
like.
point,
Yeah, go ahead.
QB 13 in fantasy points per game. He was QB 7 in expected fantasy points per game. Like, yeah, I bumped him up a ton in my ranks. I've actually, as we're talking through this, I was like, I wonder where I got him ranked. I just bumped him up to QB 12. I was like, my ranking of him previously has been too dismissive.
I love that range of quarterbacks this year so much, and I'm so happy to play in that sandbox. I mean, tier 3 in ECR is Jordan Love at QB 10 all the way through Kirk Cousins at QB 18, and it includes Jayden Daniels, it includes Jared Goff, it includes Caleb Williams, it includes Justin Herbert, it includes Trevor Lawrence. I'm just like so happy to get any of those guys at cost compared to the top guys. And Andy, you mentioned it very quickly. It's one of my favorite nuggets I've heard all offseason is that Tua led the league in passing yards last year and was still QB 19 in fantasy points per game. Like he's not going to lead the league in passing yards by so much more that he makes up for that difference. I mean, he was behind Russell Wilson in fantasy points per game last year. When you don't run, there's a limit to the ceiling, and you have to really believe in what you can do with the arm. So yeah, I'm definitely out on Tua at cost as well. Quick note on the Fantasy Pros Draft Kit. Unlock your winning season with the Fantasy Pros Draft Kit. Get expert rankings, in-depth analysis, and customizable cheat sheets. Visit fantasypros.com/kit right now and dominate your draft. Again, that's fantasypros.com/kit. All right, guys, let's combine the tight ends here as well. Dalton Kincaid, tight end 5, 67th overall. Kyle Pitts, tight end 7, 79th overall. These are two guys that I'm pretty in on both of them. D-Bro, what do you make of these two tight ends?
Draft both and enjoy. I want to invest in Dalton Kincaid, and again, I'll bring it up, but people talk about it with the tight end, or they talk about Dalton Kincaid as a tight end and stuff, and I get it. Like, yes, it's his positional designation. He's a freaking wide receiver. He's going to be Buffalo's wide receiver 1. So I think the moniker of investing in second-year talented wide receivers fits for Dalton Kincaid. Everything he did last year was incredibly impressive as a tight end. I mean, we're talking about once he got the starting role, he was top 12 in every metric that we care about. Yards per route run, target share, all those things. He takes another step forward this year. Kyle Pitts, the risk is all baked in, man. I mean, he's just going in the same spot of drafts that he was last year, and I'm going to continue drafting him. I think the injury stuff we've heard in the offseason that maybe we didn't know last year during draft season is very real. And I'm sorry, like, I know this point has been just hammered home, but give me Kyle Pitts not shackled by Arthur Smith. There is no iteration of any freaking NFL offense where Kyle Pitts, and I don't care, even a less than healthy version of Kyle Pitts, there is no NFL offense that should ever exist with Kyle Pitts in it, where Kyle Pitts gets 5 red zone targets throughout an entire season. 5. You can count them on one freaking hand. That should never happen. The talent is still firmly there, and the metric that I always go back to for projecting ceiling for tight ends in fantasy is yards per route run against man coverage. Oh, looky there. Kyle Pitts last year was still 7th in this metric, right ahead of Travis Kelce. The talent is there. The passing volume will be there. And we actually get competent quarterback play in Atlanta this year. Give me both these guys.
Yeah, Andy, I want to get your opinion on both, but specifically on Pitts. I mean, to me, like, the biggest reason, and maybe the only reason to like consider not taking Pitts where he's going, is just the emotional factor of I've been burned once, I've been burned twice. Like, I just can't do it again. And quite frankly, I don't blame anybody like that, especially like more casual players who, like, you know, a lot of the diehards, like, they get really into the weeds or the numbers, like Deebro's saying, and it's like, oh, it makes so much sense. But for the casuals, like, I remember, like, when I first started playing fantasy, if a guy burned me, no chance was I drafting him next year, even if the logic panned out that it would make sense. So outside of the emotional factor, I don't see a whole lot against him.
Yeah, the only thing to keep in mind there is, like, you need to think about who really burned you with Kyle Pitts. Was it Pitts, or was it like the worst quarterback situation in football or close to it last year? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Was it Pitts, or was it Arthur Smith and the sort of spin the wheel game that he was playing when they would get anywhere near the goal line? I think that's what's burned you. It wasn't Pitts himself. This is this is just an obviously very good player. And one of the points that I've been making about Atlanta, like on Yahoo platforms, is that like we're giving maybe this is a strained comparison, not sure, but like we're giving Garrett Wilson all of this credit for having been burdened by a terrible quarterback situation these last couple of years, right? And we're pricing him like basically at the back end of round 1, early round 2, but we're not, obviously because they get Aaron Rodgers, but we're not really giving the same level of bump to Drake London and Kyle Pitts, who are two guys who I think are just awesome. And their quarterback situation was at least as bad. I mean, whatever. We're comparing two terrible things, but like the Zach Wilson situation wasn't much better than Desmond Ridder and Heineke. Like the quarterback play in Atlanta has been absolutely atrocious. So I see no reason why we shouldn't think of guys like London and Pitts as capable of that same sort of jump. And it's not baked in to the same extent that it is with somebody like Wilson. So this is the first year that I've actually ended up with a lot of Pitts, particularly in early drafts, because he's not. I don't think we're fully like all the people that were like, oh yeah, this is the best tight end prospect we've ever seen. This guy, generational talent, all that. Those people seem largely out, or they've just been like beaten down by the past couple seasons. But all those things are still true. They'll probably still use him that way. I think Pitts is a great find. The one thing that I think is interesting about Buffalo, there's a lot that's interesting about Buffalo, but I agree with the notion that Dalton Kincaid can be the essentially the wide receiver one. It is a really funny receiving room because everybody was basically a slot receiver last year. Kincaid was functionally a slot receiver last year. Curtis Samuel, of course, was used heavily in the slot. Khalil Shakir used heavily in the slot. Like, okay, those are their top three guys. And I know that my Yahoo colleague Matt Harmon has made a very convincing case that actually like the type of player that Coleman is coming into the league, when that guy succeeds, he's a big slot. But obviously they can't all play this. You can't have 4 slot receivers and no outside receivers, right? Like that just doesn't work that way. So I am interested to see where these guys align and how it all looks when it gets on the field.
D-Bro, the last question I want to ask you quickly is because you just said that you're in on Dalton Kincaid and are making the case for him. Just 2 hours ago, I got a notification that you had put him on the trade block in our Dynasty League that we were both in. Can you respond to these allegations and explain yourself?
I knew it. I knew that was coming. I knew that was the segue you're going to go with. And my rebuttal, which I've been crafting and marinating on for a few minutes now, because I knew this was coming, Worm. I don't need Dalton Kincaid when I drafted all the Sam Laporta, and I have Sam Laporta on that Dynasty League. So I like Dalton Kincaid, but when you already have the tight end one in Dynasty right now, he might be gracing my fantasy lineup very much. So would you like Dalton Kincaid?
No, I have Pitts and Bowers in that league. So
you have Pitts, which I traded to you already. Yeah,
yes, correct.
Yeah.
I have so much respect for this move. By the way, I can't tell you how many times over the years I've included a name in a pickups column or some sort of listy column just because I was going to throw them on the trade block. Right? Like I have definitely written up guys before because I was actively and aggressively trying to trade them in a fantasy league. So all kinds of respect for that, D-Bro.
So everybody in the Fantasy Pros League that's listening to this, come get Dalton Kincaid right now. Shameless plug. Shameless plug. Come on, let's talk trades.
All right, we'll get out of there on that. Thank you again, Andy, for coming on and doing us. It was a big favor, not a mild favor. We appreciate you coming on, giving us some good stuff, illuminating our audience to what a phone book is. And yeah, thanks for coming on. Hopefully we'll get you on again soon. For D-Bro and Andy, I'm Ryan Wormeli. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.